Hello, everybody, and welcome to our video today. We're doing something a little bit different, and we're going to talk about Shadow and Bone, which was recently made, of course, into a Netflix series. It's exciting to see, fantasy, turning more often into TV shows, and obviously there's some coming as well. We wanted to just dig into some of our thoughts about this, as we are writers, right? So, fire away. What are we thinking first about? Just perhaps a show or information that we've got about it from our reading or watching or research.
This adaptation is what finally helped me understand why fantasy and high fantasy in particular with fleshed out world building systems is so much more common in books than it is in movies, because a lot of it just gets down to the sheer amount of time you spend explaining terms. I watched about halfway through the series before I picked up the book, and there are so many world building terms that were clear to me by about 2 chapters into the book than watching several episodes. Like they use the term Grisha, which just means a magic user. And I remember when that term was used in the TV show, I thought, okay, are all magic users Grisha? There's a war going on. So is it allegiances? Like this side is Grisha, this side isn't? Is it like a dark magic, light magic thing? There's so many different things this magic does. Is anybody a Grisha no matter what your power does? But within the first or second time they use the term Grisha in the book, it's cleared up. So I think if you're wondering about the order and to go with this, I'd say read the book before the show, because it follows it so closely, which is great. That the main advantage of the book over the show is that it serves as a primer to understanding the world building of the series.
I will say that for my preference, or in my opinion, this is one of the few instances that I can think of where a filmed adaptation is superior to the source material that it comes from. Really, the only other one that I can think of, once again, my opinion, is The Hunger Games.
Yes, I was hoping you'd say that.
Yeah, I mean, it's just the series feels a little bit more mature, a little bit more developed, a little less prone to some of the YA tropes that Leigh Bardugo indulged in. I'm not to take any shots at her. It's a fantastic book, but partially off of the strength of the performances of the actors, but also just the translation from text onto screen, it really dials back some of the YA tropes, specifically the heroine being feisty and annoyed with everyone who is kind to her, and then impossibly eloquent and snappy with the most powerful people in the world, which you just wouldn't do that. You'd clam up and you wouldn't have anything to say. That it seems to be a really common trope amongst this type of book, and the book definitely indulges in it. The series much less so. There's a whole host of other things that I could say, but I won't monopolize the time. But I definitely just want to lead with that. The show's better than the book.
Well, sorry, go ahead.
Okay. I was just going to hop onto that and say that I think this is, I've got 2 really quick thoughts, one of which goes off of Cameron's thing and one of which goes off of Erica's. The first of which is, I think that maybe in that kind of change of characterization, we maybe see some of the strengths of these different genres, right? Because so many YA books are effectively kind of self-insert fantasies on some level, right? A lot of teenage girls would like to be Katniss, at the very least at the start of the Hunger Games, right? A lot of teenage boys would like to be Percy Jackson. A lot of us would like to be really witty in front of people that intimidate us and in situations that are really tense, particularly because we are all too familiar with the fact that more often than not, our tongues are tied, right? But then alternatively in TV, I think more often we get characters portrayed as characters and less characters kind of made to be this self-insert fantasy. So I think maybe that's kind of just like a strength of the medium, which I think is a good thing, right? And I think hopefully maybe propels more media like this in TV in the future. I think also to the point of what Erica said earlier, like this particular story does use a fair amount of special effects, right? You've got the fold, you've got the monsters within the fold, you've got the fire that flies, you've got the shadow magic that shows up once or twice. Don't want to say too much about any of those particular things for spoilers' sake, but there is a decent amount of what I would say is fairly high quality special effects going on here, which is really expensive. And so I think it's really exciting that this was done by Netflix, because I think that the whole streaming revolution that we're in the middle of makes this funding maybe more widely accessible. So maybe this is the kind of high production fantasy that we can get at other junctures going forward as well, possibly. But that's not really the point of this conversation. So someone else talk.
I think a strength of the medium, and something that shows up in the Hunger Games adaptation too, is that in a movie you can zoom out more than you can in a single point of view first person novel. And I think the source of everybody saying they like this better than the book is that we can follow multiple plot lines. Whereas the first book is, this is Alina, this is her bird in a gilded cage story of being the chosen one and being taken into this sinister palace. The series has that as one plot line, but there's two separate threads we're watching come together. And that's more accessible to do in this medium than in the book.
Something that I think is particularly interesting going off of this conversation in general is looking at when Shadow and Bone was published compared to when the show was released. Leigh Bardugo, pardon me, I can't pronounce my own name. I hope I'm saying that right. I really think her approach to these books was interesting. She was working at a high school when she wrote them, and she literally interviewed teenagers asking them what they wanted. And we're looking at 2012 or so, publication date 2012, writing, I assume, was, before that. That's normally how, writing books works, I guess. But looking at the trends that were going on at that time, we can see the Twilight trend, where there's the harmful, dark bad boy. We can see the traditional love triangle, which was also really big at that time. There's a lot of things that readers were very, very invested in about a decade ago. And I think it's really interesting looking at how those tropes were translated to the TV show. I think that some of them were transitioned, especially in the post-Me Too movement, to be a little bit more accessible and a little bit more complicated, as opposed to just the bad authority figure who's attractive and misunderstood, but requires ownership. I think looking at how those things were adjusted, at least for me as a 2021 audience, I'm much more interested in the show than I am in the book.
I will say that for me, as I tried to compare that love triangle from the book to the series, I definitely found myself more invested in the relationships in the series, not necessarily because of any changes to the source material, although there are a few, and I think we'll probably want to talk about that. I mean, this is actually an extremely faithful adaptation, despite the introduction and weaving in of all of these other viewpoints, which, by the way, pretty much every single female in my house would like Kaz Brekker to step on her face. So there you go. As far as the triangle goes, though, the only thing I can really put my finger on is the quality of the performances from Mal, Alina, and the Darkling in these in this Netflix series. They're top-notch actors, and they really bring depth and nuance to what are, I won't call them cardboard characters. They're certainly better than that in the book, but they've got way more depth on the screen than they do on the page.
Cameron, you called him the Darkling just now, and I think that's a significant point because in the book, that character's name is the Darkling, and nobody good is going to be named Darkling. So even though he's a romantic false lead, oh, Mari is making a very hurt face at me right now. Mari, you'll have your say in a minute, I promise. But you don't have a lot of confidence that somebody named Darkling is going to be a good boy, and this is where the heroine is actually going to end up at the end. And one thing they do to keep him more on target as a romantic false lead is they let him go by his actual name in the series. He's General Kerrigan. After a while, she's on first name terms with him, and he's Alexander. So I think there was a conscious change they might have made to make it more believable that she could end up with this dude.
I listened pretty carefully. I don't think I ever heard the name of the Darkling in the book at all. I listened to it.
No, it doesn't come until later. It's a moment when he reveals it.
Okay.
Jeff, did you have something to say?
No, it's okay. No, I'm glad people have been going off, because one of the reasons that I wanted to have this conversation about the book was I found it really fascinating that so many people were saying that they prefer the the series to this novel. I often tend to feel differently than most people. For me, I totally understand and appreciate the enjoyment of multiple POV. I love multiple POV books. They're my favorite novels. It's what I tried to write first. So I do completely understand, and Erica touched on this previously, that if you're reading this, it's singular viewpoint. We can't jump. We might want to go see what Mal is doing while Alina is in the little palace and all that, but we can't, right? We can't know what adventures these other people are getting into with a first person novel. And so this show gets to benefit on the fact that there's now so many more books in this Grishaverse, and it's getting to weave them together. And I realize I've read that they're using things that are sort of implied from other books and whatnot. But so I think that's a cool way that they're saying, well, we got more to work with than the author had when she was writing this first book, and that's cool. But for me, the show does fall into some of the tropes I see with TV shows. I think they were trying to make her more active in the beginning, and create more of a shock value. And I'm talking about like two core moments that happen early on that shouldn't be big spoilers because they happen so soon. One is that it's a surprise that Mal's unit is going into the fold, and then she feels like she's got to figure out a way to follow, right? But that's not in the book at all. We go in and she knows she's going into the fold, and to me that was more engaging because we got to deal with her fear and concern right away of like, oh crap, like I gotta go into this thing. And then you get these charming moments with Mal right away where he's like comforting her about it. And so that was more interesting to me than this like, oh, we're just near it to map it. And then, oh no, Mal's in. And then, oh no, I've got to figure out a way. And the other reason that this really matters to me a lot is because then we get this more in the show. It might be argued, well, she gets to be more active. She gets to make the choice to follow. She's getting to be powerful in her decision making. But to me, it's really problematic because she sets this fire, this like small fire that then like causes a problem. One, it's really weird that would happen and that no one was worried about who would be an arsonist for maps. Like it's just super strange. But then basically because of her, all her map making buddies die. They're like all murdered. And then again, not small spoilers for the beginning. First couple episodes here, only first couple episodes. Like, and the reason I have to mention that is because we don't see her deal with that fallout like at all. There's no guilt from her of it's because of me that the map makers all had to go on this mission and then all died. And to me, that made her a very unlikable character from right from the get-go through basically the show, because I never see any regret or remorse for all these lives that she was really responsible for. And so I feel like that's a problem that we see happen in shows where people like want to give a character this power, this motivation, but then they don't necessarily deal with the fallouts of those actions. So I feel like that's a pretty big, at least for me, weakness in the show that it doesn't happen here at all. And so I'm just able to enjoy her so much more in this book than I could in the show. I've got something else, but I'll leave that for.
Interesting that you mentioned that one, because there's exactly the flip thing that happens at the end of the story. And I won't spoil exactly what happens because it is sort of at the climax of the story, but it's pretty much the same complaint you had, but in reverse, where in the book, the way that Alina handles being stuck in the fold and being under attack and how she resolves that differs pretty widely from how it's portrayed in the show. And how she does it in the book is actually pretty ugly. Like some innocent folks die, and it's on her. And the show, I felt like, did a much better job of making that a more heroic moment for her. I do agree, though. I hadn't really thought about that initial one. I think you're absolutely right about that one.
Yeah, I do think that this first episode drama that we get from Alina, I think right out of the gate, at the very least, establishes her as pretty ethically ambiguous on some level, right? Like better, maybe, than the alternatives, but certainly not purely good, right? Which I think does, like, that rankles some people, that also really engages other people. So maybe you win some, you lose some. Really quick, while we are talking about character agency, making characters more active in TV and things like that, there was one aspect of conversation that we were talking about before we started filming this that I would like to return to, that ties into that, which is namely the romance between Alina and the Darkling, and the TV making her more proactively active within that romance, right? Particularly during one moment in which the two of them passionately kiss, right? In the TV show, that being in the map room, in a book being in a side room, if we're as a group remembering correctly. And in the TV show, she consents to this, right? Like explicitly is asked if she is okay with what's happening. And she consents to it. And the statement by the director, if I was remembering what you said, Mari, correctly, was that he wanted to show that she was being active in this.
It was actually the actor playing the Darkling slash whatever his name is. He was primarily concerned with the scene, if it was going to be shown to teenagers, that she was in control of the situation. So he added the line, "Are you sure?" Like he worked with the directors and producers, and they angled and shot the scene so that it seemed like she was the one in control. There's an article about it. We can link it below this video if anyone wants to check it out.
Cool. I think that brings up a whole different question about changing things for TV, right? Because actor changes it so that she is more in control, right? But also, and I'm going to say, what I'm about to say is going to spoil things, but I think this is an interesting and important conversation, so I'm going to say this. Skip ahead if you don't want to hear it. We are very shortly thereafter told in no uncertain terms that he has been lying to her the whole time, right? And so it's interesting to me to think that one question of getting, is it really consent? Is it really actively participating in a relationship if the whole relationship is based on fundamental lies, right? And so that seems to me like another possible moment where changes were made to make people more active, but actually the change doesn't work, right? And if anything, maybe complicates the situation further. I don't know what you guys think about that, but that was one thing that got to me. Was it seems like people were really happy about the fact that he was asking for consent, but to me it seems like he wasn't, because the person she was consenting to wasn't real.
Go ahead, Mari.
For context, really quickly, I've got nothing to add other than fandom and tweets and memes, but I think it's particularly interesting looking at how people react to Ben Barnes as the Darkling, because the entire internet is thirsty for him. I guess besides Cameron's daughters, everyone wants Ben Barnes, the Darkling, to step on their face.
I'll add my own name to that list. He's hot. Yeah.
No, yeah. My name's also on that list. But I also when you look at the memes and you look at the reactions, a lot of them are like, yeah, he killed everyone. Not killed everyone. I don't know if that's a spoiler. I don't know who's gonna be listening to this, but he's done really evil things, but he's a gentleman, so it's okay. And I wonder if there's like a backwards, like an effect where we make the villain more sympathetic make him more attractive in simple ways that make him more of a thirst trap as opposed to an actual threat.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I feel like, sorry, I'll go ahead.
No,
Thank you.
Erica, you go. Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like there wasn't a lot gained by turning the Darkling sympathetic for all of one kissing scene, because because the sequence of the scene is Alina and the Darkling are making out. The Darkling needs to leave the room, and then this wise woman figure comes into the room and says, "Hey, teenage girl, this is a bad life decision, and you need to get away from this boy." And she helps her escape. And so all you really gain by thinking the Darkling is a good guy is maybe 5 minutes of a romantic false lead, because eventually she's going to be empowered by this older female figure who is helping her getting out of an abusive relationship. So I think, except for more easily making him a thirst trap, I don't think there was a lot gained by the changing of who's proactive in that scene.
From a character perspective, I absolutely agree. The Darkling, as written and as the character truly is entirely unconcerned with Alina's consent. That being said, for the front half of the story, I absolutely was more interested in the developing relationship between the two of them in the film than I was, or in the series, than I was in the book, because Alina is more active, and because she's more active, she's more interesting. She's not just a passive receiver of love, which who cares? She takes the reins a little bit, and that's fun and that's interesting. And I do think that there is value in displaying consent to young and impressionable viewers. I have no problem with that. The part where it falls apart is that he wouldn't do that. He wouldn't care. And that part of the character hasn't actually changed between the two media. And so it's satisfying in the moment, but doesn't hold up to scrutiny later.
Yeah. I think that's the big issue to me, right? Is it feels like this moment is being celebrated, and yet the man is still a gaslighting murderer villain, right? Who effectively tricks, by implication, according to his mother, multiple young women into these kinds of relationships over prolonged periods of time, right? And yet, I don't know. So I don't love him. I think that moment almost immediately afterward, I feel like is undercut. And I feel like what we gain, if we're talking about from a TV perspective, the cynical part of me would say what we gain is a romantic scene that's a little steamy, just steamy enough to, get an audience happy about it, right? And avoid any like potential backlash, right? Like that feels like what we get to me, but then I feel like the actual story undercuts that. I don't know.
Yeah,
Jeff, you've got thoughts.
Done just to garner some positive tweets from woke folks. It feels that way a little bit.
For me, I mean, I feel like the evidence that we're giving for why this could be bad can go both ways. This idea that he's got this history of, making women fall in love with him. One way he could do that is to be a domineering force in the relationship, right? Which seems like what some people are advocating for, which is more similar to that part of the novel. But the other way is to seem sweet in certain ways, or is to seem to check in. So to me, since he is conniving and smart, it is believable to me that he could ask for her consent as a way to, further lull her in to love with him, because he doesn't know that his mother is about to. He doesn't know that the old woman, who is not. We don't know who she is. That the old woman is going to.
We'll just put a spoiler warning on this video.
Yeah. I think we've stepped
I've
on
ruined
enough
all of it.
minds.
We've
stepped on
the
enough.
end. We don't say the
Yes.
end. We say everything.
No. Yes.
Yeah, because he doesn't know that his mom's about to sneak in and take her away. So he's still working his game, And so to me, part of him asking for consent could be that. So that particular one I think is very fascinating to talk about, its genesis and how it came to be. But I think that one's okay. Another one's more problematic to me that I've seen brought up is the race issue, that we see some early signs of racism towards Alina. But then it's not followed up, and in the show it's kind of confusing to me because it's sort of brought up. I'm like, wait, who feels this way? Why do they feel this way? Who are her people? So on and so forth. And it just feels like it's kind of tossed in there or shoved in there without a lot of afterthought of the ramifications, sort of again like Burning the Maps was to me. And there's like, that doesn't even exist in here. You know what I mean? So I feel like there are, those to me are the kind of the tropes of shows of like trying to put something in, but not following through with it. And at least for me, I have not finished the book. I'm halfway through. I'm not saying that this is definitively better than the show to me, but this to me does not make as many mistakes as the show does. And so for me, it is more enjoyable because of that. And real quick, I'm going to say I actually ship the relationship harder in this book between her and the Darkling and the way they communicate to each other than I do the show, because initially to me, Ben Barnes feels very cold throughout. I enjoy Ben Barnes, I enjoy the actor, but he feels very kind of like cold throughout, and he's got some incredible monologues, and I'm like, that's some of the best fantasy monologues I've ever seen in a show. Like, they're epic. It's worth it to me to watch an episode just for some of those things that he talks through. But there, to me, they didn't feel like they had as much chemistry as, especially early on, as I'm getting through this. Especially because we get more into like the way she feels when he touches her, and that like, again, I see why they might want to get away with that, because like he's giving her the power, right? But I assume that's all for an eventual subversion, so I'm okay with it. So just my thoughts. We've got a couple minutes left. Go ahead.
I was a little influenced by the medium in which I consumed the book, which was the audiobook. The narrator of the book, who was actually quite good, except that I didn't love her voice for the Darkling, which was very monotone and very smooth and never deviated emotionally at all. And so I was kind of bored by him, honestly. And maybe that would have been different had it been coming in through my eyeballs. But I think that influenced me there.
Just really quick, just really briefly, to the point that you were saying, Jeff, I agree. I think that particular, sorry, I'm really hitting this romance scene hard for absolutely no reason. I agree. I think that it makes a lot of sense character-wise. I think the reason that I got stuck up on it was less, I thought it made sense in TV. I also thought that it got celebrated outside of TV and didn't deserve it, because it felt like we were celebrating a villain for gaslighting. Or at least some fans that I encountered were celebrating a villain for gaslighting. As far as the story is concerned and things like that, 100% agree. It makes total sense for him to not be who he is because he's a villain. I don't think it makes a ton of sense for them to be celebrated outside because he's a villain. Anyway, I'm done.
I think we're wrapping up on time. I'm just a little heartbroken that I never got to talk about the Six of Crows integration, because Six of Crows is...
Real quick, go for it.
Oh, real quick. I think it's absolutely fascinating to show the characters' backstories pre-Six of Crows, because I'm a huge fan of Six of Crows. Kaz Record can also step on my face. But I think that the choice to basically develop and show backstory leading up to Six of Crows, which should be their primary plot in season 2, was a really fascinating move. And I think Cameron was the one who said earlier that because the world's more fleshed out now, with Shadow and Bone being the first book she wrote in this universe, with having all these other books written, she has the opportunity to go back and adjust things in her world. That just feels like, honestly, the author's dream. To be able to adjust and change things, and to have someone with a whole heck of a lot of money support you in that. So I was really pleased with what they did with Six of Crows.
What I want to know more than anything else is how Leigh Bardugo managed to get the amount of creative control that she seems to have on this series, because I want that.
Yeah, that is a fascinating question. You know, why, because there's a lot of, you know, good fantasy books out there, like, why this book series, why so much control? I mean, it's been a benefit, you know, we're all getting to enjoy watching and reading, and I think overall people are enjoying, whether we say one is better than another. I think for the most part people are liking it, you know. It's on the positive side of things, but it is fascinating to wonder that. Okay, any last quick comments or thoughts about this? Oh,
I
guess that's-
recommend either the series or the book. I mean, they're both great. Despite my preference for the series, I would absolutely go back and listen to or read that book again. It's a good one.
Yeah, I normally tend to like watching shows first because I do tend to like books more because books are going to flesh things out more, and so I get more information about it. And I would think that would still hold true here because it's like you're getting to do a deep dive into one aspect of the story. So you get to watch the Netflix show and then dive into just the Lena Darkling Little House and like, you know, get some training and stuff like that. And so it's like cool. And then you can read more about the other characters by reading the other books. So to me, I think that works out well. But we are going to go ahead and close here. Thank you for joining us. If you liked us talking about, you know, a fantasy show and the book associated, I feel like we could have done this for even way longer than it. But let us know your thoughts, which you preferred, what you like, if you like them equally, and if you'd like to see more of these, or if you have any recommendations of other fantasy shows that we should be all over, like we were for this one. Thanks for joining us, everyone, and we'll see you next time.